Let me look at this 9th chapter of the book of John, this long story about the man born blind who is given sight by Jesus. To unpack this and to try to understand its deeper meaning and how it comes to life for each of us in our faith journey. It was used in the very early church to prepare those anticipating baptism at Easter. That's why the church places it now. And also last Sunday's gospel about the woman at the well was also part of the journey of growing in faith for those who were to become disciples of Jesus at Easter time. It's a sign. It's number 6 in the signs of John's gospel. Number 7 comes next week with chapter 11, the raising of Lazarus. And so we have these 7 signs. They're not meant to be taken at surface or literal value. They're meant to point us to something much deeper. So let's look at the story and then begin to seek out the sign. The architecture of the story is very important. The foundation thought is the man is born blind, which means it's not an incidental or temporary blindness. It's a profound, deep, life-altering, enduring darkness which is in his life. He has never seen the faces of his parents. He has never seen the sunrise. He has never seen the beauty which surrounds him. He is profoundly in darkness. The second thing that's of interest here is the question his disciples ask is the question every one of us asks at certain times in our lives. Who sinned, he or his parents, that he should be born blind? This is a question I'm sure we've all asked sometime, that when something really goes wrong, I'd say, it must be something I did wrong. It must be some sin I have that merited this affliction, whatever it is. And Jesus says, it is no sin. This man's blindness is a sign leading us to a deeper understanding of God's revelation. Notice also the man is not just sighted now. It's not just that he sees with the eyes of faith. And therefore he begins by calling Jesus the man, and later he'll call him a prophet, and in the end he'll say, you are Jesus, Lord and Savior. I do believe, he says. So he just doesn't grow in seeing, he grows in seeing with the eyes of faith. And that's the story. Also, by the way, there's an interesting conflict here, a tension between two gods. The God of the Pharisees, a God of legalistic judgment which excludes people. He's thrown out of the synagogue. And a God of healing and inclusion in the person of Jesus Christ. One a false God, the other the true God. The contest between the two gods. And he grows from the false God into an experience of the true God in Jesus Christ. That's part of growing in faith. Now, what does this mean to us? It has a much deeper meaning. His blindness and his darkness has to do with the blindness of faith. Look back in chapter 3 there in the Gospel of John, and you'll find this Nicodemus person. Nicodemus is a Pharisee, is a very religious man, socially important, very powerful, and obviously well off. We'll find that as we go through the Gospels. And yet, he comes to Jesus by night. It does not mean after dark. It means he is in darkness. He's in somewhere, life is empty for him. and he comes seeking the meaning of life from Jesus. Come Be My Light is a book which was published posthumously on the reflections of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. It's a collection of her journals, her spiritual journals, and it has an extraordinary revelation in that for 9 years, Teresa went through a profound darkness, desolation, spiritual desolation for 9 years. She was committed to her ministry, but her prayer was empty, it was dry. And she went through this agony of somehow feeling distant from the God whom she served so generously. That's darkness. Every one of us at some time in life, every one of us, maybe more than once, will go through periods of darkness, sometimes very long, sometimes brief. They will come because of fear. They might come because of remorse. They might become part of our journey because of some profound failure, some life-altering failure, a disillusionment in a relationship, some breakdown that separates me from something or someone that I cherish, a darkness. Sometimes it will come from profound sickness or the death of somebody close to us, and we enter into some condition of darkness. No spiritual consolation. That will happen once, maybe a number of times in our life. In 2002, I went through about 6 months of profound darkness in my life. Prayer was dry, prayer was empty. There was no new day, each day was just another day. The affirmations or consolations of life were passing, they had no value for me. And I was clinging, looking for a meaning. I was looking for an answer. I was asking the question the disciples asked. Who sinned? What sin do I have? I knew I had many sins, but which of the sins has brought this upon me? How did I deserve this? What did I do that this should happen to me? I went through this great sense of bankruptcy. Robert Coles calls it moral loneliness. It's a loneliness of the spirit. It's an inner emptiness. It's a breakdown in all spiritual consolation. It's a suspicion about the value of each day. I'm not sure each day has a value. I'm not sure the sun rises each day. I don't notice the sunrise. I don't notice the grace of each day. I have lost touch with the blessings of my life. I don't see the blessings of my life. It's a period of darkness, like the man born blind was in profound darkness. And I searched, and I read, and I looked for a reason for this. And I read all the lives of the saints, because the saints went through this. I read John of the Cross, who talks about the dark night of the soul. And I read and read. And then I came upon a review of a book, which was written in 1961 by Dag Hammarskjöld. And it was a collection of his spiritual reflections, his diaries. He was killed in an air crash in what was northern Rhodesia in 1961 in September. I remember I was in the seminary at the time, and he was Secretary General of the United Nations, a man of extraordinary faith. And this was a tragic, tragic end to a life that was full of promise. But he had talked with his friend beforehand, and he said, after I have died, you may publish my journals, my spiritual diaries, since they might help someone. Now, in 2002, I read about this. I read a review somewhere about this, and I went to Anne in the bookstore and I said, get me Markings, the book called Markings by Dag Hammarskjöld. And of course, Anne, being very resourceful, came back and said it's out of print. It's more desolation. But anyway. However, she said, I can get you a used copy. I said, get me a used copy. So she went out and she got me a used copy of Dag Hammarskjöld's Markings. And I mark all my books here. I annotate all my books. And I read this in June 2002. And one of the meditations he had, he was going through a period of profound darkness shortly before he died. And just a month before he died, he wrote this, struggling with his darkness. His journal says, I don't know who or what put the question. I don't know when it was put. I don't even remember answering. But at some moment, I did answer yes to someone or to something. And from that hour, I was certain that existence is meaningful, and that therefore my life is self-surrender and has a goal. I came to a time and a place where I realized that the way leads to a triumph, which is a catastrophe, and to a catastrophe, which is a triumph, and the price of committing one's life would be the cross. He found a deeper meaning in his life. He stopped asking the reason for his darkness, and he concentrated on the meaning of his darkness. And he found great consolation in saying, my darkness has meaning. That spoke to me in 2002. I have a priest friend who went through, 16 years ago, went through an extraordinary, deep trauma. He's an alcoholic, and he hit bottom. Close friend of mine, so I walked through this terrible trauma and struggle with him. And he went into a recovery program, and he's been sober now for 16 years. And he will tell you today that the greatest gift that God gave him was his addiction. That was his greatest gift. Because now, having gone through this darkness and this trauma, and emerged by the power of Jesus Christ, the grace of a higher power, something greater than himself, that it had meaning. It had meaning. He is now more compassionate. He is more understanding. He is more forgiving. He is more patient. He belongs to Jesus Christ, who is suffering and who died and who rose in triumph. And he now lives in the glory of a resurrected person. So where are you in your struggle? In your loneliness or your emptiness or whatever bankruptcy you have in your life? Where are you in the fears or the remorse or the failures or the sins of your life? Where are you in the burdens that weigh you down? Are you asking, who sinned that this should happen to me? Are you asking for the reason for this? Are you asking for the meaning? Is there meaning? One question comes from the person who is spiritually blind. The other comes from the person who is spiritually sighted. And that's the teaching of the man born blind, whom Jesus heals, gives meaning, and gives wonder and possibility to his life. Amen.